The Third Army headquarters buzzed with activity in December 1944. Staff officers shuffled papers, radios crackled with frontline reports, and military police maintained tight security around the command building. Everyone knew General George S. Patton was somewhere in the field, but nobody could quite say where. This wasn't unusual. What was unusual was that Patton had developed a parallel existence, a shadow version of himself that moved through the war invisible, unrecognized, and utterly effective. While the world knew him as the general with pearl-handled revolvers and a gleaming helmet, another Patton walked the battlefields, anonymous, muddy, and deliberately unremarkable. This is the story of that other Patton and how his self-imposed anonymity became one of the most effective intelligence operations of World War II, conducted not against the enemy, but within his own army. George S. Patton understood something fundamental about human nature that most generals missed. People perform when they're being watched. They don't reveal truth, they present theater. In official settings, Patton was unmistakable. His dress uniform was immaculate, every medal positioned with precision. His boots reflected light like mirrors. The famous pearl-handled revolvers, actually ivory, he'd correct anyone who got it wrong, hung at his sides. His helmet bore 3 stars that could be spotted from 100 yards away. He carried a riding crop, stood ramrod straight, and projected an image of martial perfection that photographers loved and soldiers remembered. But Patton had created an alter ego for himself, and this version was his true working uniform. The reconnaissance Patton wore a plain field jacket, often with no insignia whatsoever. His helmet was standard issue, usually dented from being dropped or knocked against vehicle frames. His boots were functional, caked in mud, showing the wear of constant use. No medals decorated his chest. No stars marked his rank. He often went without a helmet entirely, preferring a simple knit cap that made him look like a dock worker rather than a commanding general. "When I want soldiers to see me, I dress like a general," he explained to his bewildered staff. "When I want to see the truth, I dress like everyone else." His aide, initially confused by this dual existence, eventually understood the genius of it. "Sir, you're conducting espionage against your own army." Patton grinned. "That's exactly right, and it's the most valuable intelligence I gather." Most generals commanded from maps. They studied terrain reports, read intelligence briefings, and issued orders based on information filtered through layers of staff officers. Patton distrusted this system fundamentally. "Information decays," he told his intelligence officers. "By the time a report reaches my desk, it's 12 hours old. The enemy has moved. The weather has changed. The situation on the ground bears no resemblance to the paper in my hand." His solution was radical. Go see for himself. But he recognized that a general's presence changes everything. Soldiers stand straighter. Officers present optimistic assessments. Problems get hidden or minimized. Everyone performs for the visiting dignitary. So Patton developed a system. He would travel to the front lines in his anonymous uniform, often with just a driver, sometimes alone. He'd walk through positions, talk to soldiers, observe conditions, and gather information firsthand. Then, days later, he'd return in his full general's regalia for an official inspection. The contrast was stark. During official visits, officers reported that positions were well supplied, morale was high, and everything was under control. During his anonymous reconnaissance, Patton heard the truth. Ammunition was running low, medical supplies were inadequate, and soldiers were exhausted. "The official visit tells me what my officers want me to believe," Patton wrote in his diary. The anonymous visit tells me what I need to know. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, commander of British forces, visited 3rd Army headquarters in November 1944. The meeting was tense. Montgomery and Patton had a complicated relationship, marked by rivalry and mutual respect in unequal measure. After the official briefing, Montgomery requested a tour of forward positions. Patton agreed, and they set out in separate vehicles with appropriate fanfare, flags flying, escorts in attendance, the full military spectacle. As they approached the front lines, they encountered a jeep stopped at the roadside. A man in a filthy uniform was bent over the engine, apparently making repairs. His driver stood nearby, looking frustrated. Montgomery's driver slowed. "Should we offer assistance, sir?" "No need," Montgomery replied, "and just some mechanic having trouble, probably a supply sergeant." As they passed, the muddy man looked up briefly, made eye contact with Patton's vehicle following behind, and nodded slightly. Patton's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. Hours later, back at headquarters, one of Patton's staff officers pulled him aside. "Sir, Colonel Henderson sends his compliments. He says he got excellent intelligence on German positions near Metz while he was broken down by the roadside this afternoon." Montgomery, overhearing, looked confused. "Henderson? Was he the mechanic we passed?" "That was no mechanic," Patton said quietly. "That was one of my best reconnaissance officers. He's been at the front for 3 days, dressed as a supply sergeant, watching German movements." Montgomery stared. "You have colonels pretending to be mechanics?" "I have colonels doing whatever gets results," Patton replied, "including looking unremarkable." Montgomery paused, then asked, "Did you learn this technique from somewhere or develop it yourself?" Patton's expression was unreadable. "Let's say I learned the value of not looking important." What Montgomery didn't know, what nobody at that meeting knew except Patton's driver, was that Patton himself had been broken down at roadsides dozens of times, gathering the same kind of intelligence he was praising Henderson for collecting. Private James Mitchell kept a detailed diary throughout his service in 3rd Army. His entry from January 15, 1945, provides a window into Patton's anonymous reconnaissance. "Strangest thing happened today. We've been in this frozen hellhole for 2 weeks, living in foxholes, eating cold rations, wondering if anyone at headquarters knows we exist. This morning, an older guy just appeared. No warning, no escort, nothing. Just walked up to our position like he belonged there. He was maybe 55, 60 years old. Dirty uniform, no rank visible. We figured he was a major or lieutenant colonel doing some kind of inspection. He sat down on the edge of our foxhole like it was the most natural thing in the world. 'How are you boys doing?' he asked. We looked at each other. Was this a trick question? But something about the way he asked, like he genuinely wanted to know, made us tell the truth. 'We're freezing, sir,' I said. 'We haven't had hot food in 4 days. Our ammunition is low. We're down to 1 blanket per man. And we're sleeping 2 to a foxhole to share body heat.' He pulled out a small notebook and wrote everything down. Every detail. What caliber ammunition we needed, what kind of rations we wanted, how many blankets. Then he asked about the Germans. What were they doing? What patterns had we noticed? We told him everything we'd observed. Their patrol schedules, where they seemed strongest, where they seemed thin. He sketched a little map right there in the mud, making notes on it. 'You boys have done good work,' he said, 'staying alive in these conditions, keeping watch, gathering intelligence. That's real soldiering.' As he was leaving, Charlie asked him, 'What's your name, sir?' The old man smiled. Patton. Charlie laughed. Right, and I'm Eisenhower. The old man's smile got bigger. Well, when you see Eisenhower, tell him Patton says hello. Then he just walked away. We sat there trying to figure out if he was joking. An hour later, our lieutenant came by. What did General Patton want? That was Patton, we all yelled at once. The lieutenant looked at us like we were idiots. Of course it was Patton. Who else would be walking around the front lines at his age? The next morning, the very next morning, a supply truck arrived. Hot food, ammunition, extra blankets, cold weather gear, everything we'd mentioned. Everything. That's when we understood. Patton wasn't just visiting. He was listening. And when he listened, things happened. Mitchell's diary entry was typical. Archives contained dozens of similar accounts, soldiers encountering an anonymous older officer, complaining freely, then discovering they'd been talking to the Third Army commander. Patton's chief intelligence officer, Colonel Oscar Koch, initially resisted his commander's habit of frontline reconnaissance. Sir, that's what you have intelligence officers for. We gather information, analyze it, and present you with actionable intelligence. Your intelligence is excellent, Patton replied. It's also incomplete. Koch was offended. Incomplete how? You tell me where the Germans are, Patton said. You tell me what equipment they have, what units are in line, what their command structure looks like. That's invaluable. But you don't tell me what our own soldiers are thinking, what conditions are really like at the front, where our systems are failing. With respect, sir, that's not intelligence work. That's… I don't know what that is. It's command, Patton said simply. I can't command what I don't understand. And I can't understand sitting in this headquarters reading reports. Koch eventually came to appreciate the system. Patton's anonymous reconnaissance provided context that no formal intelligence report could offer. When Koch reported German strength opposite a particular position, Patton could say, our troops there are exhausted and undersupplied. They can't hold against that force. We need to reinforce or withdraw. Other commanders, reading the same intelligence reports, might order the position to hold, unaware of the real conditions their soldiers faced. Patton knew. He'd been there. He'd seen the exhaustion in soldiers' eyes, counted the ammunition they had left, felt the cold that was sapping their strength. Sir, Koch admitted after the war, I thought your reconnaissance trips were reckless grandstanding. I was wrong. You were gathering a type of intelligence that formal systems can't collect, the human intelligence of your own army's condition. February 1945. Patton was conducting reconnaissance near the German border, dressed in his anonymous field gear, accompanied only by Sergeant Mims, his longtime driver. They encountered a checkpoint manned by military police who didn't recognize them. The MP, a young corporal, was thorough, perhaps too thorough. Identification, he demanded. Patton handed over his papers. The corporal studied them, then looked at Patton with suspicion. These say you're a general. That's correct. You don't look like a general. How many generals have you seen, Corporal? Well, none, sir. But you're not wearing any rank. You're covered in mud. You're driving yourself around. That's not how generals travel. Patton smiled slightly. How do you think generals should travel? In staff cars, with flags and escorts and, looking like generals. And if I did that, Patton said, what would every German sniper within 5 miles be aiming at? The corporal's expression changed as understanding dawned. The general, sir. Exactly. Now, Corporal, you've done excellent work. You checked identification. You questioned suspicious behavior. You didn't just wave someone through because they claimed rank. That's exactly what you should be doing. But I need to continue my reconnaissance. The corporal waved them through, then turned to his partner. "I just stopped General Patton." The General Patton? He was driving himself around in a muddy jeep, looking like a supply sergeant. "That can't be right. Check his ID yourself if you don't believe me." Word spread through the MPs. Within days, they had new orders. General Patton sometimes travels in unmarked vehicles without rank insignia. If someone presents identification showing they're a general but doesn't look like it, verify the ID but don't delay them. Patton heard about the new orders and laughed. They're learning. Now the trick is making sure the Germans don't learn the same lesson. Patton's system of anonymous reconnaissance wasn't without costs. Several times, he came close to being killed by German fire. Once, he was nearly captured when he walked into territory that was supposed to be secured, but actually still contained German holdouts. His staff worried constantly. General Hobart Gay, his chief of staff, tried repeatedly to convince Patton to stop the reconnaissance missions. "Sir, if you're killed, Third Army loses its commander. Is whatever you're learning worth that risk?" Patton's response was immediate. "If I don't go to the front, I'll make decisions based on incomplete information. Those decisions will get soldiers killed. So the question isn't whether my reconnaissance is worth the risk to me. The question is whether it prevents enough casualties to justify the risk. Sir, with respect, you can't prevent every casualty. War means losses. I know that," Patton said quietly. "I've ordered men to die. I've sent them into situations where I knew some wouldn't come back. That's the burden of command. But I refused to send them to die because I was too comfortable to learn what they were facing." Gay understood. Patton's frontline reconnaissance wasn't about bravery or image. It was about responsibility. Every general ordered soldiers into danger, but few were willing to share that danger themselves. Patton insisted on it. "Besides," Patton added, "the day I'm too afraid to go to the front is the day I should resign. You can't ask soldiers to face what you won't face yourself." After the war, when historians interviewed captured German officers, an interesting pattern emerged. The Germans had detailed intelligence on Allied commanders, their habits, their patterns, their command styles. They knew Eisenhower commanded from headquarters. They knew Montgomery was methodical and cautious. They knew Bradley was steady and professional. And they knew Patton was reckless, aggressive, and always in dress uniform with distinctive pearl-handled revolvers. Except that last part was wrong. A captured German intelligence officer, Major Klaus Richter, was interviewed in 1946. He described German efforts to target Allied generals. "We had photographs of all the senior commanders. We knew what they looked like, how they dressed, what vehicles they used. Patton was easy to identify. The fancy revolvers, the riding crop, the 3 stars on his helmet. Our snipers had orders to shoot him on sight." "Did they ever get a shot at him?" the interviewer asked. "No, we saw him at headquarters, at parades, at official functions, but we never saw him at the front. We thought he commanded from safety, unlike his reputation suggested." The interviewer paused. "Major Richter, I need to tell you something. Patton was at the front constantly, multiple times per week. He walked through positions, drove through combat zones, conducted reconnaissance under fire." Richter looked stunned. "Impossible. We would have seen him." "You did see him. You just didn't recognize him. He didn't wear his dress uniform at the front. He wore plain field gear with no rank insignia. He looked like any other American officer." Richter sat back, processing this. "You mean the supply officers we ignored, the random majors in muddy jeeps, the anonymous Americans conducting reconnaissance? That might have been Patton." "Many times, yes. Richter was silent for a long moment. Then, "That is brilliant and terrifying. We were hunting for a man in a costume while the real man walked past us, invisible." After the war, Omar Bradley wrote extensively about his command experiences. One passage stands out. "George Patton was the most complex commander I knew. In public, he was flamboyant, theatrical, almost a caricature of the warrior general. But in private, he was thoughtful, analytical, and surprisingly humble about his own limitations. His habit of going to the front incognito initially struck me as dangerous showboating. I worried he'd get himself killed for no good reason. But I came to understand that George needed to see things for himself. He didn't trust second-hand information, and he was probably right not to. I remember finding him at a forward observation post once, dressed like a supply lieutenant, sketching German positions. My first instinct was to order him back to safety. But then I looked at his sketches. They were detailed tactical maps that contained information our intelligence hadn't gathered. He'd identified machine gun positions, probable artillery locations, and potential weak points in the German line. "How long have you been here?" I asked. "4 hours," he replied, without looking up from his sketching. "George, you're the 3rd Army commander. You have staff officers for this." "Staff officers don't see what I see," he said. "They look for what they expect to find. I look for what's actually there." I couldn't argue with his results. 3rd Army moved faster, struck harder, and took fewer casualties per mile advanced than any other army in Europe. Part of that was George's aggressive nature. But part of it, maybe the larger part, was that he knew the terrain, knew the enemy positions, and knew his own soldiers' conditions better than any other commander. He achieved this by making himself invisible. The famous general with the pearl-handled revolvers was a public relations creation. The real George Patton was a muddy man in a plain uniform, walking battlefields alone, gathering the intelligence that kept his soldiers alive. In the decades after World War II, Patton's anonymous reconnaissance became the subject of military study. How effective was it? Could it be replicated? Should modern commanders adopt similar practices? The answers were complex. Patton's system worked because of unique circumstances. He was commanding a large army in mobile warfare, where positions changed rapidly and current intelligence was crucial. He had the physical stamina to endure frontline conditions at age 59. He had the force of personality to make his system work, despite staff objections. And he had the trust of his soldiers, who respected him enough to speak honestly even when they recognized him. Modern warfare, with its emphasis on communications technology and real-time intelligence, might seem to have made Patton's methods obsolete. Why walk to the front when you can view it through drones and satellite imagery? But military historians note that Patton wasn't just gathering tactical intelligence. He was gauging morale, identifying supply problems, and understanding the human dimensions of combat, things that can't be measured from a distance. Colonel retired David Hackworth, writing in the 1980s, argued, "Patton understood something we've forgotten. Soldiers perform for generals. They hide problems, minimize difficulties, and present optimistic assessments. The only way to see the truth is to become anonymous." Modern commanders, with their computer screens and video conferences, are making decisions based on performance, not reality. We need more generals willing to get muddy. Among Patton's personal effects, found after his death in December 1945, was a photograph that was never published during the war. It shows Patton at a frontline position, surrounded by soldiers. He's wearing his anonymous reconnaissance uniform, plain field jacket, muddy boots, no insignia. He looks exhausted, aged beyond his years, nothing like the vigorous commander in official photographs. The soldiers around him are relaxed, natural, clearly unaware they're being photographed. One is showing Patton something on a map. Another is laughing at something Patton said. A third is just sitting there looking tired, while Patton sits next to him in an identical posture. The photo captures what official images never could. Patton as his soldiers saw him. Not the theatrical general with pearl revolvers, but the older man who came to foxholes, listened to complaints, and fixed problems. Someone, probably Patton himself, wrote on the back of the photograph, "The real work, January 1945. That photograph, more than any official portrait, captures the truth about George S. Patton. He was two men: the public general who inspired soldiers with his image of martial perfection, and the private soldier who served them by becoming invisible. "When I want them to see me, I dress like a general," he'd said. "When I want to see them, I dress like everyone else." In the end, both versions were necessary. The theatrical Patton gave soldiers someone to follow. The anonymous Patton gave them someone who understood what they were enduring. Decades later, soldiers who served under Patton still told stories about the muddy man who appeared at foxholes, listened to complaints, and made things better. They remembered both versions of their commander, the one they saw at parades and the one who saw them at their worst. "Sir, that is Patton," became more than just a surprised recognition of identity. It became an acknowledgement that their general was different, that he cared enough to become anonymous, to share their danger, to see their truth. In an army of performers, Patton chose to be invisible. And in that invisibility, he found a kind of leadership that few commanders ever achieve. The trust that comes from genuine understanding, earned one muddy foxhole at a time.